Hello and welcome to West Country Wanderings. Welcome to another one in my canal series. We're back on the Thames Severn Canal. That's thus behind us, and we're back looking at another Secrets of the Thames Severn. Also, this video is my 500th video. I can't believe that. Number 500. 500 video I've made since West Country Wandering started way back in February of 2021. I hope you can join me for this tale today, looking at the history of the connection between Gloucestershire County Council and the Thames Severn Canal. It's a fascinating tale, so I hope you can join me again here on West Country Wanderings. If you haven't come across my Secrets of the Thames Severn Canal series before, it's a companion series to both my Secrets of the Stroudwater and my regular updates about the Cotswold Canals. That's the name for the combined version of the Thames Severn and Stroudwater, which is currently under restoration, particularly the section between the town of Stroud and where it joins the canal network at Saw Junction. And I'll bring you the next update, update number 17, later in the autumn to bring you up with the news on that. The last one I did, which is about 3 weeks ago, is update number 16, and I'll link to that at the end of this video. Anyway, enough of all that. Where are we today? Today we are on the Thames Severn Canal in the county of Gloucestershire, not far from the Daneway Inn, so also not far from the Sapperton portal of the very famous and well-known Sapperton Tunnel here on the Thames Severn Canal. Why have I chosen this location? Well, it's all to do with a trust. The Thames Severn Canal Trust. No, not the Restoration Trust, but the one that was formed in 1895. Why was it formed and who joined it? Towards the end of the 19th century, the poor old Thames Severn Canal, which had done much trade throughout the bulk of the 19th century and earlier on in the 18th century, was getting a little bit tired and worn with lots of problems, which we'll come on to shortly. And a number of bodies and other navigations had serious concerns about the viability and the continuation of the Thames Severn Canal. Well, who were these other navigations? Well, there were many of them. There were 6 in total. I'll try and remember all of them. We had the Stroudwater navigation, the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal navigation. We also had the Sharpness Canal navigation and the Wilson Barks Canal navigation, as well as the Thames Commissioners. And they were all concerned that the viability of this was under threat. In other words, continuing to be able to get navigation along it and through it. And they joined forces with the Gloucestershire County Council. I'll come on to why they were interested in it in a moment, and several other public bodies to see what they could do to make sure that this waterway stayed intact and in full use to keep trade and commerce going. So what were the sorts of problems that were preventing this canal getting boats from the River Severn across to the Thames and vice versa? Well, there were many, but the most one that was causing the biggest issue was lack of water in the Thames Severn Canal. That sounds a bit strange. Here we are, in the middle of a very rainy summer period. It's raining again today, so I'm under a tree, a big oak tree, to provide shelter for me and the camera at the moment. And that meant that a lot of the time this canal bed was dry. I've got a couple of photographs showing exactly that. What they wanted to do, all these bodies that came together, was to ensure that water stayed in this canal. So what they had to do was to stop it leaking. Lack of water wasn't the only issue with the Thames Severn Canal in the late part of the 19th century. As well as it being dried up in many sections, preventing navigation through it, the other problems was that there was a lack of maintenance and basic things like the sluices and the lock gates. When the trust was formed, and shortly afterwards, an immediate plan to do remedial work to make sure the navigation continued commenced, including right here on the section between the village of Chalford on the rise up to the Daneway Inn and the portal of the Sapperton Tunnel. One of the things that happened was repuddling, relining in effect the canal bed with clay to stop water leaking out of it. It begs the question though, why a government local authority was interested in what is in effect a private company for navigation. Initially, of course, the Thames Severn Canal was set up as a limited company with shareholders. Gloucestershire County Council is maintained by the taxpayers living in Gloucestershire. There hadn't actually been a county council that got directly involved in the fortunes and whys and wherefores of the canal previously, so it was most unusual when Gloucestershire County Council became part of the Thames Severn Canal Trust in 1895. What were their reasons for that though? Well, trade coming through both the Stroudwater and the Thames Severn Canal, linking up the mighty rivers of the River Severn and the River Thames, meant that trade was coming through Gloucestershire, or parts of Wiltshire as well, as it leads right down there towards Inglesham. And that trade was important for the county of Gloucestershire. It meant that it kept people employed and taxes were being paid, providing an income so that Gloucestershire County Council could provide services for the people of the county. Unfortunately though, things didn't quite work out that way, as we'll see later on in the video. Well, the remedial work started in earnest in 1898. In 1899, to much ceremony, the canal was completely reopened. To celebrate this, on the 15th of March 1899, a boat called the Trial, I've got a photograph of it, travelled from London right through to Easington. I think the photo's around the Stroud area on the Stroudwater section. And it was carrying coal from London, hence that way, towards the west of where we are currently. Unfortunately, those celebrations and the boat gaining access all the way through the Sapperton Tunnel and along the TNS, they were very short-lived because the canal closed again just 3 months later, and the reason this time was leaks 3 miles to the east of the village of Coates. That's the other side, the eastern portal of Sapperton Tunnel there. There were so many leaks it had to close again. Now, towards the end of 1899, Gloucestershire County Council grew more and more concerned about the lack of trade progressing through and from different parts of the country through the county of Gloucestershire, and their income and all the associated effects of employment in the county. Something strange happened the following year. On the 8th of January 1900, Gloucestershire County Council assumed complete control of the Thames Severn Canal in its entirety. This is the first time that's ever happened on a canal in the United Kingdom. It proved to be an innovative but very costly exercise, as we'll see. So behind me there is Daneway Bridge. Actually, this was repaired not that long ago. I think it was only reopened about 6 months ago. Some stabilisation work taking place there. That bridge has always constantly been under threat. The highways would probably like to just bulldozer over it and replace it by a flatter and newer one. Hope that never happens, because obviously it's an important part of the Thames and Severn history here. And here is the wonderful wharf, the Daneway wharf here, which I did film previously. I was given permission to go into the garden to film the inner part of the wharf there. Won't be doing that today. I'm actually going to be going on to another location now to show you some of the work that Gloucestershire County Council did back in the 1900s to reopen this Thames Severn Canal. So see you in part 2. We've now come around to, it's probably my favourite sections of the entire length of the Thames Severn Canal. We're at King's Reach. We've been here before. It's so called because of King George III, who came here in 1788 to examine the works and see what had been done to cut through this magnificent canal through the Cotswolds, including the work on the tunnel, and it's been forever named ever since. But later, in 1900, this was the site of where Gloucestershire County Council started lining the sides of the canal with concrete. And it was a huge success. However, well, we'll come on to the however in a moment. But not only was work done here, the most troublesome part of the entire Thames Severn Canal was around the summit section we've looked at previously again as well. There's a stop lock there, as indeed there is one just down there, just underneath Tarleton Overbridge. Around there they had to completely reline it, repuddle it, to ensure the water wasn't escaping in what Whitworth, one of the engineers of the canal, had termed the troublesome rocky road. You can see where the concrete lining is to best effect. Here I'm standing underneath Tarleton Road Overbridge, looking in the direction of the Coates portal of the Sapperton Tunnel, and you can just see the 45-degree lined sides of the canal, which are lined with concrete to stop the water escaping. As you can see, water is still in this section of the canal, showing that the Gloucestershire County Council scheme worked. Now that remedial work continued on, the repuddling, the concrete lining, the repairs to the locks and sluices, and other assorted works, including repairs to things like the roundhouses and the buildings at the Thames and Severn Canal owned, including the wharfside buildings. What that all meant was in July of 1902, the canal partially reopened, and the section was not an obvious one. It was actually from the town of Cirencester. So it was from the Cirencester Arm Link, that short arm section there, I think it's about 1.5 to 2 miles long, which leaves the main line of the canal Thames and Severn around the village of Siddington. It carried on then, so it's completely reopened from Cirencester all the way through to where the Thames and Severn joins the River Thames around Lechlade. Now the remaining section opened in 1903. That's the section from Warbridge in the town of Stroud right through to where the Cirencester arm meets the main arm, in effect reopening the entire Thames and Severn Canal. The following year, a boat called Storch, which I have a photograph of, did a celebratory movement of coal, and it took it right into the town of Cirencester. We have a copy of a report from the Gloss and Wilt Standard from that time, which is really interesting and highlights a lot about the boat Storch, who owned it, and what it was carrying and how much it all cost. It's fascinating. Now the boat Storch was owned and captained by one Joseph Fletcher, who was actually born in the village of Chalford, just a few miles from where I currently am, just outside Coates. He didn't live in Chalford though, he'd actually moved to Swindon to be right on the Wilts and Berks Canal as it goes through the town of Swindon, because trade had decreased on the Thames and Severn Canal. In order to sustain himself, he needed to move to somewhere where the canal was still fully operational at that time. So he was living there and operating boats on the Wilts and Berks Canal. In fact, he had 4 of them. Now, Joseph Fletcher's father was one Francis Hewer, also from the village of Chalford. In fact, he trained his son up, so he became a master boatsman and got him started to own the 4 boats that he ran on the Wilts and Berks. Sadly, I think a couple of those boats were broken up, one was sold, and he was left with good old Storch. Now Storch was going in to deliver coal to the coal dealers wharfside there of F. Kegg, C-E-G-G, inside the town of Cirencester. In fact, it was going to be the first movement of coal into the town of Cirencester via the Thames and Severn Canal for many, many years because of all the associated problems with water loss and particularly no water and being in the higher summit section. Just before we turn to our story about good old Storch and its adventures going into the town of Cirencester delivering coal, this makes a good viewpoint of the concrete lined side here at King's Reach on the Thames and Severn. You can just see how wonderful that concrete is. In fact, that looks like it's in better condition than most concrete you see in roadsides that were built in the 1960s. So Gloucestershire County Council did a really good job on this one. Now, Storch was initially laid up at Latton Basin because, of course, you have the North Wilts Arm that connects the T&S to the Wilts and Berks there at Latton. It was laid up there, and it actually did a test run through to Cerney Wick, where the roundhouse is, just to check that everything was okay before it made its big journey heading up to Staffordshire to get coal down into Cirencester. Now the route actually was from Hedonsford Colliery in the Staffordshire coalfields, and it was actually 120 miles, so you had to get down to Birmingham on the BCN and then down on the Worcester-Birmingham Canal to Worcester, navigable section of the River Severn from Worcester to Gloucester, down the Sharpness Canal, along the Stroud Water, and then make its way around the T&S and up the Cirencester Arm, 120 miles in total. But was it profitable for Storch to do that? Could it be done, and was it a viable business? Well, the answer to that was yes. Well, how do we know it's a confident yes? Well, I've actually got the numerics written down here, which is from the Wilson Park Standard, the Gloss and Wilt Standard, or the Wilson Gloss Standard, the newspaper from 1904. And it says that the Storch charged the same rate as what the railway would have done. And that was 7 shillings and 6pence per tonne of coal. Now, it was carrying some 37 tonnes of coal, so the freight came to £13 cost and 17 shillings and 6 old pence, not forget the 6 old pence as well. The canal tolls that he had to pay for all those canals navigating down right from the heart of the Midlands there in Staffordshire came to £6. So he deducted one off the other. And of course, then he gave him some, to pay off the overheads for the fuel for the boat. Well, not the fuel for the horse that was pulling the boat. It was just a 1-horse pulled boat. And it paid off, obviously, all his other expenses for that. So he could make a reasonable profit, not hugely, but a reasonable profit to compete with the railways that were taking the trade away from the canals. Around 1904, things for the canals looked broadly optimistic. Bradshaw's Guide came out that year as a very good guide to the canals of the United Kingdom, just like they'd done so for the railways in the previous century. We come back to our however, don't we though? It's still lingering in the air, and I'll tell you about our however after the break. The author of Bradshaw's Guide had actually written in 1904 that the works done by Gloucestershire County Council had been executed really well and enabled the Thames and Severn to thrive into the future. So what's gone wrong? Why is it not a navigable canal these days? The confidence of the author of Bradshaw's Guide, we don't know who actually wrote that piece, was a bit misfounded. In fact, after Storch's journey into Cirencester carrying coal, very little more transport was being used up and down the Thames and Severn Canal at all. Fundamentally and fatally, a report was published in 1907. Also around that time, further work took place at Puck Mill, a bit further on in the direction of Stroud, because that needed repuddling around there as well. So there's still lots of ongoing problems and lots of expenditure for Gloucestershire County Council to outlay to keep the T&S going. The T&S actually had a series of closures, which was really frustrating to anyone that wanted to use it for a viable commercial concern if they wanted to get goods from A to B, because one day they would do an agreement to a customer, but of course they'd then get a message sent to them, probably by telegram, saying that the Thames and Severn had been closed again for whatever reason, because it needed some more maintenance to it. If Keeling's report of 1909 wasn't bad enough, later that same year, the Thames Conservators, that body and agency that looks after navigation of the River Thames, also interested in this because of getting freight along their river as well, also produced a report. In fact, it was more damaging than Keeling's, because the costs that they come up with were even more horrific, as you'll see. What they come up with was the fact that Gloucestershire County Council needed to lay £8,000 initially, a further £24,500 for further works that needed to be done, and over the next few years they would need to outlay a whopping £73,000, which was a lot of money back in 1909. Wow, that really was a bit of a death knell to the report for the people at Gloucestershire County Council, looking at it and looking at their budgets and their income as well, and to really seeing if this was going to be a viable operation after all. A boat carrying a freight of grain to Lechlade and Kempsford went along the Thames and Severn Canal, passing over the summit in April of 1911, and it was probably the last boat to do so. The following month, a boat carrying stone in May 1911 was the final recorded entry in the records of the Thames and Severn Canal. Closure set in fast. In 1912, a lot of the staff employed by the Thames and Severn Canal, in effect then Gloucestershire County Council, were dismissed from the company in around the Chalford area. No freight was moving on it, and indeed the dividing line, Whitehall Bridge, A demarcation zone, if you like, meant that no traffic at all was to move between Whitehall Bridge and east of there in the direction of Lechlade. There still was a little bit of trade around the Stroud valleys, but that too was not to last. In 1924, Gloucestershire County Council authorised another report to examine the state of the canal. It wasn't great reading, and it meant there was no way back for the Thames and Severn Canal. In fact, on the 31st of January 1927, it was a date of final closure for this wonderful engineering construction here in Gloucestershire and part of Wiltshire. So that's it for today here on West Country Wanderings, one of my canal series, and also looking at a secret of the Thames and Severn Canal. There'll be another one coming up looking at another secret on the Stroud Water Canal, and then we'll be back here again on the Thames and Severn Canal looking at a couple of the secrets on Sapperton Tunnel. If you like that sort of thing, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Then YouTube will alert you to when those videos arrive. We'll also do lots of other videos on the channel, including ones on railways, lost railway walks, and exploring areas in the Cotswolds and further afield in both Devon and Cornwall too. Until next time, take care, look after yourselves, see you soon. Bye bye for now.